Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War news update, the third part thereof for the 11th of November 2024, Armistice Day. We are going to start with kind of where we left off in the last video concerning military aid. This is obviously more at home in the geopolitics video, discussing, what's going on with America, how are other nations reacting, so on and so forth. We'll start with this idea that actually there were many in Ukraine, it appears, who were not too upset with Trump winning the election, because there was a lot of frustration with the Biden administration's anti-escalation rhetoric that felt that caused the Biden administration to really be in a state of paralysis. Yep, you can have these weapons. We'll keep giving you the same kind of weapons and stuff, but you can't use them deep into Russian territory. We aren't going to give you this. We aren't going to do that. And so there was this thought that maybe if Trump comes along, some bravado from Trump, or we could end up somehow getting to a better place with Trump rather than with Biden. There are now been these appointments and also rejections of certain people that do not look good for Ukraine. However, there are some thoughts that still there could be this situation whereby Trump has an argument. Maybe the negotiations don't go well with Putin, and it's like Putin, who has already, by the way, done some interesting things in terms of the propagandists on TV. Skabieva on national TV showed naked Melania Trump on national TV in her modeling days and blah, blah, blah. And it was all a real dig at Trump. And that's the sort of thing that actually could annoy Trump to the point where it then gets a bit personal between him and Putin. And if it goes that way, because previously he's like, Putin's a strong man, Putin's this, Putin's that. But if Trump being so, I think, thin-skinned as he is, the same with Elon Musk, these guys present themselves as like really strong, robust characters, but actually they're super thin-skinned, super thin-skinned. Trump has kind of admitted that. He said, I don't like it when people criticize me. I like it when people blah, blah, blah. And just look at Elon Musk's behavior. I'm reading a book at the moment, which is almost finished, it called Character Limit, on how Elon Musk took over Twitter. And he is obsessed with people who criticize him and getting retribution on them. So these kind of people are actually quite brittle when it comes to interactions with others. So if Putin insults Trump enough, then Trump could turn on Putin and actually therefore start supporting Ukraine more. And there's been supposedly as part of this phone call, I believe, or statement from Trump's team that, if Putin goes down the escalation route, Putin escalates anything, then he's going to regret it. So you have this range, right? And I said this with the US election, I was wrong. I got my range wrong. But realistically, there is only the range of, Trump really, really supporting Ukraine and really, really working against Ukraine. Okay, and where's he going to sit here? And I think probability at the moment is likely that he, nothing particularly changes. He'll end up forcing Ukraine to the negotiating table or not giving them aid. So then Ukraine have the choice of, well, do we go to the negotiating table? Or do we hope that Europe comes up with the goods for us and can support us? Because I think this is really unfortunate, because I actually think Russia, if the right stuff was provided for Ukraine now, and if their own defense industrial base can start making missiles at scale, so on and so forth, if Russia can be hit in key places like oil infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and sanctions keep biting, then there is a chance that Russia could really crumble. Although we've been saying it for a long time, but I think actually the signs are not looking good for Russia, and they are losing incredible amounts of people and equipment. And I think if Ukraine were given 6 months of being properly supplied by allies, then actually they've got a chance of really making things difficult for the Russians. So here, Timothy Milovanov from the Kiev School of Economics says the Economist is right. Many Ukrainian officials privately favoured a Trump win, seeing him as a preferable to Biden's self-deterrence. Whether they're right, I don't know. But one thing is clear, Trump will push a solution on Kiev, like it or not. And here's the thing, like, it certainly appears to be the way, and also all the talk indicates that it will be a forced negotiation, that Ukraine, whether they want it or not, will be kind of forced towards this particular place. And the problem is, this is the US deciding what the political outcome is for another sovereign nation. So on the one hand, they've been invaded by this country. So as a sovereign nation, you're invaded by a country and they kill your people and destroy your cities. And then on the other hand, another sovereign nation who was otherwise your friend suddenly flips and goes, and whether you like it or not, this is going to happen. And you're like, so we don't have agency in any of this, that we're invaded and then we're told that we have to make peace with the people that invaded us. So that makes me feel really, really uncomfortable, that. Zelensky quickly endorsed Trump's victory, frustrated with Biden's delays in aid and restrictions on long-range missile use. But I think Zelensky also quickly moved to address the damage done on the relationship with Trump because of the Pennsylvania visit in September. The Economist talks about two possible Trump peace plans. One, the Vance plan. The Vance plan frees the conflict on current lines and force Ukrainian neutrality. Pompeo plan, enhance military support, potential NATO membership. Both plans are better than none and no support, but in my view, the concern should be what else Russia might build in to disarm and subdue Ukraine. The most important part of the agreement will not be what happens now, but what happens to Ukraine in the future. The situation in Ukraine is difficult. It lost 620 square miles, or worse, since 2022, but they're still less than what Ukraine occupies in Kursk. Struggles with conscription, add energy infrastructure, migration and economic production challenges, but there is resilience and some recovery. Military morale issues emerging. Nearly a fifth of the soldiers reportedly AWOL. So this is an issue that I've reported on a little bit before, but it'd be interesting to know what the problem is with sort of desertion or AWOL. That might be true, but numbers are likely smaller by at least a half. The Economist also writes about breakdown of trust between society, army and leadership. It is true that there are evident leadership challenges, but it's not true that there's a breakdown between civilians and army. Far from that. So be careful what you read, basically. The Economist also makes an interesting point that Trump is unlikely to completely abandon Ukraine due to Republican base opinion, but may demand transactional benefits like access to natural resources. But I also think that Trump and his team are annoyed with Ukraine and might still be upset at Zelensky's September visit for no fault of his, but no one cares. One thing is clear to me, that ending the war in Ukraine will be a focus of Trump even before he gets into office. Well, he has talked about how it's going to be solved one day after he's in office. So that's the latest. He said, first of all, he said he was going to, this should tell you everything, which is, I'm telling you it'll get sorted before I get into power. And now he's saying it'll get sorted one day after he's in power. So already his campaign promises are not true. But nonetheless, there you go. So Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor to Biden, President Biden will have the opportunity in the next 70 days to present arguments to Congress and the new administration that the United States must not leave Ukraine, and leaving Ukraine would mean increasing instability in Europe. They're not in Ukraine. I don't like this leaving and being in Ukraine. They are supporting Ukraine. Although I suppose to some degree, actually, they've just given contractors permission to go to Ukraine, but that's just people who fix things. Okay, anyway, that aside, I don't think Biden's going to have a cat's chance in hell of changing Trump's mind on anything, pretty much. Anything Biden will say, he'll just go the opposite, Trump, if he's anything like my son. Donald Trump's son says Zelensky will lose his allowance when his father takes office. So if you're under any illusion as to what the people around Trump think, there's this GIF or short video that Donald Trump Jr. has produced, which has money falling down on Zelensky, and then you're 38 days from losing your allowance, POV. So he's just saying that basically there will be no money going towards Ukraine. Then, as I told you earlier, David Sachs, who's one of the billionaire oligarchs involved in the Trump administration, either tangentially or right in there. The smart people know that Ukraine war is a grift and they are in on it. The dumb people think it's about democracy, even though the vast majority of Crimea and Donbass are ethnic Russians and want to go with Russia. The US has been fighting democracy in Ukraine. David Sachs is just the most disinformation-riddled knob jockey this side of I don't know where, this side of an entire equestrian centre of such jockeys. Yes, so you can guess I don't particularly like David Sachs. I would like to meet him on a dark night in an alley around the back of my house. I'll give him a peace of mind. I'm not a violent man. Shane Harris here saying Mike Pompeo, who had been rumoured in a senior national security post, strongly supported American aid to Ukraine and said there was no evidence that Trump does not. But he's now been rejected, and so is Nikki Haley. So both those two, as I mentioned earlier, staunch supporters of Ukraine, would be good in a Trump administration. They've been rejected, I would argue, because they are supportive of Ukraine. You can't. Trump is going full on conformity here. Everyone in his administration is going to be MAGA and singing off the same song sheet. There can be no disagreement on no policy nuance. And I think he's going full on in there. Now, Peskov has praised Trump and declared positive signals in Trump's position on the war. I would say that as soon as Russia say, oh yeah, this sounds like a good idea, it's because it's in Russia's best interests. So if there are positive signals in Trump's position on the war, it's because Trump is doing things concerning Ukraine that benefit Russia. He says that Trump, quote, talks about peace and does not talk about the desire to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. No, and this is exactly the problem with Trump's rhetoric the whole time, is that he's never once said that Russia are the enemy, or that Putin is a dictator, a murderous dictator, or anything like that. Oh yeah, but he's looking for peace. No, it's a reflection of him literally not thinking that that Putin is the person Putin is, and that Russia is the nation it is in terms of what it's done in Ukraine. It's just, yeah. But anyway, and this favorably distinguishes him from the Biden administration. So obviously Peskov smoothing over some things there. There's been mixed messages coming out from Russia, though, which is kind of what they do anyway. They put out all narratives, and people are confused, and they see what lands well, and they kind of use that to their advantage. Skabieva, as mentioned, propagandist, has naked images of Melania on national TV, and that's going to be insulting to Trump. So, I don't know. I don't know if they're just trying all things out with Trump, see what fits, see what works. Now, Foreign Minister spokesman Georgi Tiki says Ukraine was not informed about the conversation between Trump and Putin. So there's, as reported, I think in the Washington Post, there's been a telephone call between Trump and Putin. Ukraine, and then Washington Post, citing sources, reported on the conversation between the two. The publication also claimed that Ukraine had been informed prior to the conversation and was not opposed to it. Ukraine are vehemently denying this. They're not happy with this. Reports that the Ukrainian side was informed in advance about the alleged call are false. Therefore, Ukraine could not approve or oppose the call. And I don't think they're particularly happy about it from what I can gather. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a very different administration from 2016. In 2016, when Trump took over, he won by accident. They weren't expecting it. And so what happened is his administration kind of rode in on the GOP coattails. In other words, that the framework of government was already in place with the existing kind of establishment GOP. There was this MAGA element, but it was very small, and it kind of grew from there. But really, it was the establishment GOP, and that means there are all these guardrails in place for Trump in his administration. Those guardrails have been taken away, and the old school GOP has been basically dismantled, and you've seen a much greater mandate being given for the more extreme right-wing populist version of the GOP, the MAGA, I don't want to say cult, but MAGA GOP. As a result, some of these new senators and new lawmakers coming in are much more beholden to Trump and MAGA, and much less kind of old school Mitch McConnell, so on and so forth. And so these people are not going to be supportive of Ukraine. They're not going to be nuanced particularly. It's going to be all in on MAGA, and that MAGA conformity will, I think, spread right across the Republican Party. I think even if people really believe it, you'll get far less support for Ukraine, bipartisan support across the parties. So as Republicans against Trump says, this is not the Republican-controlled Senate of 2017. There will be no Mitt Romney, Jeff Flake or Mitch McConnell as leader. The new Republican leader of the Senate will be totally controlled by Trump. There will be no checks and balances at all. So all three Senate majority leader contenders quickly fell in line with President-elect Trump's new demand that they will be willing to use a Senate tool to allow him to quickly get his preferred top administration officials in place. So he already wants to bend the rules, and all of those who are likely to be Senator majority speakers are happy with him doing that. And so there's already this sense that you've got an autocratic leader wanting no accountability and to be able to do things quickly and against protocol. And it seems that he's got huge support for that. A spokesperson for the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, has told Huffington Post that the Republican majority had no interest in taking up Ukraine supplemental soon or at all. So there's going to be no new appropriations for Ukraine. In my opinion, that's that. That bill that went through, that $61 billion bill, that's the last money that you'll see to Ukraine from the US, unless something bizarre happens, like, for example, an argument with Putin that all goes a bit wrong. But other than that, I don't think you're going to see it. And we're starting to see now these upstarts in Europe. Robert Fico, the Slovakian leader, said that if the USA leaves a war, then Europe should follow them. According to him, Slovakia is already working in two directions, trying to maintain relations with both the West and Russia. Of course they are. Of course you are, Fico. What will happen when this war is over, he says? All will return to the Russian market. So why shouldn't we have standardized relations with Russia as well? So Slovakia, I mean, this is where I start getting depressed about the state of affairs, because this is a permission structure that the new Trump administration is giving to Viktor Orban, who's Trump's best mate, and Robert Fico, and Serbia. And we'll come on to Serbia in a second. It's not looking good. Zelensky plans to replace the ambassador to US, Oksana Markarova, and is studying candidates. So Markarova was someone that Mike Johnson, the speaker, asked to be fired. Previously in September, Mike Johnson, called on Zelensky to fire Markarova after his visit to an arms factory in Pennsylvania that was deemed as partisan. So Medvedev, though, he said this previously. I don't know if this is something that he would still advocate. A tired Trump issuing platitudes like "I'll offer a deal" and "I have a great relationship with" will also be forced to follow all the system's rules. He won't be able to stop the war, not in a day, not in 3 days, not in 3 months, and if he really tries, he could become the new JFK. So that's what Medvedev has said, and it's the idea that that actually Trump's rhetoric is ineffective. But I don't know now, and I'm very worried for Ukraine. Now, here's the analysis. The audio is a bit overloaded on this, so I do apologise. But this is Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. Rory Stewart is your right-wing, old-school conservative. You know what real conservatism is. And Alistair Campbell is a former spin doctor for the Tony Blair government. I like Alistair Campbell these days. He's on point in what he says, and they're both really good on Ukraine, these two. But this is what they are saying about Europe's reaction to Trump. They've already gone and looked at the Trump victory, and not very they weren't saying particularly nice things about the incoming Trump administration. But here they talk about the ramifications with regard to Ukraine.
Biden and the duck with not a lame duck with no legs. How would you assess Macron's legs as a duck?
Well, exactly. Not great at the moment, are they? I mean, remind people a little bit about where Macron's political position is.
So the context here is they've just discussed that Macron's rhetoric has been very strong, which I reported yesterday, on support for Ukraine post-Trump election. But Macron's position itself is precarious.
It's in France.
Not great. He's I don't know what his ratings are right now, but they're very, very low. And basically, he's been to some extent disempowered because he called that election, and he's now got this government led by Michel Barnier, who's basically operating day to day very well. He's doing a good job, Barnier, but at the same time, it's Macron is not as powerful as he was.
And then we've talked about these elections in Europe, where far-right populists who had a lot of the Trump rhetoric have prevailed. So Austria, where they came top in the polls, Netherlands, where they came top in the polls, Germany, where the AfD performed very well in some of the state elections. And most of those forces are people who, like Viktor Orban, do not want any continuing confrontation with Russia. And this is also true, I think, of the far left in Germany too.
Wagenknecht, yeah.
So then I guess the challenge for Europe is that all those politicians, the sort of center ground politicians in somewhere like Germany, are going to be worried about the fact that a lot of their voters are defecting to parties that don't want any more support for Ukraine against Russia.
Absolutely.
And just to add some extra kind of meat to the bones there, so I think what you're going to see is very likely, in my opinion, that Trump will lose, or the GOP will lose the next election. Not because they're the GOP or any kind of... I think we're in a period of change politics, whereby the anti-incumbency vote is very, very powerful. And that's pretty much why you saw, it goes some way to explain the Trump victory, right? It's like, here's the establishment party. Trump actually plays himself as an anti-establishment person. And if you look at, is this the first year in the history of ever where every single incumbent government has been voted out? Something like that. Like, literally, the statistics for anti-incumbency at the moment are phenomenal. And I wonder whether this has something to do, this is where I just go into a bit of conjecture, but I wonder whether this has something to do with our own personal psychologies. When we're all looking at phones all day and we get so enraged when the internet goes down for a few seconds and everything's immediate, and we order things off the internet and it gets there the next day, and we don't, there's no putting effort into long... There's no living slowly, particularly. There's no kind of eking things out or working hard at something over a long period of time to get some kind of outcome. If you see what I mean, we live in this very immediate society whereby when we're upset at something, we want immediate change or action concerning what we're upset about. And the problem is, when we have our faces in our phones all the time, is that we become upset about things all the time, and we're told about every single little thing that goes wrong with any government. In the old days, we would have just been going around our daily our jobs, our daily lives, doing whatever we do, our work, and we talk to people about whatever. But we don't have this knowledge or these claims or disinformation floating around our heads the whole time, every time we turn on a screen. And so we just let government get on with what it does, and it makes mistakes and it does good things and whatever. And we broadly read about it after a few days in the newspaper. Nowadays, it's everything all at once. And what that means is we're very susceptible to fear, like fear sells, and disinformation. So, for example, the whole $95 million spent by the Republicans on transgender adverts about transgender operations in prison, immigrant prisoners getting these operations. You're like, that happened to two people. It's literally two people, $95 million spent on it. That's what everyone's talking about. Oh, it's all about transgender. Oh, Democrats transgender. It's like, that's the least important thing. Like, there's all this other stuff, which is way more important, that's actually has a tangible effect on people, and yet so many voters have had the emphasis of the in this case Democratic campaign skewed towards this one relatively unimportant thing, really irrelevant in the whole grand scheme of things. But that's what everyone's concerned with, because we're all in our faces and we're susceptible to all this stuff bombarding us the whole time, and then we get up in arms about it because we always get more affected by the negative campaign. And this is what I was telling you, joy versus fear. Fear wins, unfortunately. Disinformation travels 6 times faster than facts. And so as a result of being susceptible to all this, when we go to the ballot box, we end up voting to change all these little things that we're told about the ruling government. We're like, screw that, I want change. And then you have 4 years of next government. You're like, screw that, I want change. And there'll be arguably will be difficult to have like 2-term governments now if we are still going to be living in this kind of change environment. I don't know. Let me know what you think.
So I don't quite get how Macron makes the coalition for Europe to really step up and fill the gap if Trump steps back.
What I didn't see yesterday, because the camera was on Macron the whole time, and the bits that I saw, I imagine
this is in Budapest where there was the European summit.
Imagine that Orban would be sitting there, who was chairing the meeting, would be sitting there smirking. Le Pen, we've talked about, as you say. So I think it'll be much harder. This is where I really do think, and again, this is why I'm so pleased Jonathan Powell's in there now. This is, I think, where Britain has to step up.
So Jonathan Powell is the new chief of staff that's been appointed by Keir Starmer, and he had a prominent role in the Tony Blair government and was behind the peace negotiations that led to the Good Friday Agreement. And as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but so some are thinking he might be someone that's been put in place because Trump's going to force the peace, and he's going to be one that wants that peace. I think it's probably a bit clever, Keir Starmer thinking if we're going to go down that route, we need someone who's good at doing this, working around the UK government, because we're going to need that kind of expertise. But otherwise, he's just really competent, and we need Britain to be at the forefront, and he's a competent person in the middle of the government that will help us to get there. And Alistair Campbell is talking here about how, well, I'll let him talk for himself.
I read a huge piece in Foreign Affairs magazine this morning about how the world's going to change under Trump and da-da-da. Britain wasn't even mentioned. Europe was mentioned, the European Union was mentioned, but we're not even in that debate. So we've got to get into that debate. And the same goes, by the way, for trade. And if these tariffs, if he goes ahead on this tariff stuff, that's going to have a massive impact upon us. And we're not going to be in the same place. Now, the Brexiteers are saying, well, Britain's in a great place now because they can do their own thing. But what is doing their own thing in a context where he's operating with, USA, China, Europe as the sort of three big power bloc?
On the flip side, and I'm not a leaver as well, there is an argument. So there is a report out yesterday talking about how actually, because Trump hates the EU, and he hates the EU because he hates alliances. He doesn't like NATO, doesn't like the EU. He likes people going on their own and transactions and zero-sum game transactions. And if we're all out against each other, then that's really easy to understand, which is my gain is your loss is my gain. I understand that, says Trump. When it comes to alliances where you have positive sum gains, where actually I need to do something, I need to invest here, but that's good for all of us, but actually that's good for me as part of all of us. He doesn't quite get that, and he doesn't like it. It doesn't sit well with him. He hates the EU. The EU tries to hold him to account. Now, the EU also doesn't like Twitter. They want to regulate Twitter, and his best mate is Elon Musk, right? And so there is this situation whereby they want to break up the EU. This is why Trump supported the UK leaving the EU, and it's why Putin supported the UK leaving the EU. The EU is a powerhouse, and Trumpian isolationist transactionalism would rather that powerhouse fell apart, pretty much for the same reason that Putin wants to see it fall apart. Because the EU can hold Russia to account, and it can hold the US to account. If we don't have these regulations that the EU puts in place, the US can sell its chlorinated chicken all around the world. They can do all sorts of things. So we're in this process of doing trade deals with the US, but it will invariably involve us not being able to dictate very much to the US what should happen, because we're now a minnow outside of the trade bloc of the EU. And we'll end up getting, really poorly environmentally regulated products coming to the UK and so on and so forth. Anyway, there is a theory, though, that there is a report that came out that actually the US is going to prioritize doing a trade deal with the UK, weirdly, over the EU, because he wants to screw over the EU. Which is it's just not good for the world. If you think about all the bastions of liberal democracy around the world, right, the EU is up there as the very best. They have Transparency International working out, the corruption indexes for Europe and making sure you jump through all these hoops to get into the EU, that you are free and fair democracies with fully transparent administrations, etc., etc. And that's what Trump wants to destroy and what Putin wants to destroy and what China would like to destroy. And China and Putin are pulling Slovakia and Hungary into their sphere of influence to undermine the EU. And here now we've got the ally, Trump, undermining the EU and not wanting to do deals with the EU. So the EU has gone from being an ally and someone that the US would work with to being a direct competitor, as Trump would see it. And I think that's a huge problem.
I also think on Ukraine, some of the people that they're talking about in terms of who might be his advisors on Ukraine, they're basically pro-Putin.
Yeah, they're not just pro-Putin. I mean, I think it won't finish with Ukraine.
No.
Because once Trump has signaled strongly that he doesn't mind very much what Putin did, and remember, I think we see we're a bit like a frog in boiling water. We're sort of forgetting the fact that before 2014, it would be completely unimaginable since the Second World War for someone to try to invade and occupy a neighboring country. Basically, since the Second World War, these borders have been respected. Once it becomes okay and normalized for Putin to do that in Ukraine, then I think the chances go up very, very strongly of things going wrong with Serbia in Republika Srpska and Kosovo. And Richard Grenell, who is Trump's super envoy, has made public statements very, very supportive of a Serb nationalist position. I think we can expect Azerbaijan to start flexing its muscles in what it calls West Azerbaijan, which is part of Armenia. I think we can start worrying about Moldova. And the Baltics countries are not at all complacent about this. I mean,
So he's just mentioned Serbia, right? Serbia with Vucic is not a place of free and fair democratic Western values at the moment. You've got ultra-nationalism bubbling away there. And actually who Rory Stewart was talking about in place with the Trump administration appears to have Serbian ultra-nationalist rhetoric. Now, then, as Ivana Stradner says, my friend took this picture in Belgrade today. So this is Serbia. Make Serbia great again. Picture of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Do people not understand what is going on in the world and how all these things are connected? Like, I am deeply scared about the direction of travel for the world. You've got an authoritarian leader now in charge of the US with oligarchic wingmen who are going to be in place, and they are going to strip away the court cases and the investigations into them that were in place and that haven't fully finished yet because Merrick Garland couldn't get off his arse and do it. So Trump's Jack Smith will now all the cases against Trump will be dropped, and he'll probably pardon himself over the hush money case. And Elon Musk is being investigated by all of these different organizations for his acquisition of Twitter and for other things going on with his other organizations. They will be dropped. Mark my word, this is not... If you are up for free and fair and transparent democracies, what you have coming into the US, into Washington, is as far from that as you could possibly imagine in modern America. And if that doesn't scare you, you are a fan of autocracy and corruption and oligarchies. It's just all the writing is on the wall. And if you don't want to read that writing, do you have motivated reason? You love Trump that much that you would forgive him all the things you would be spitting at the screen at if you saw the Democrats doing that. Like if you saw George Soros do for the Democrats what Elon Musk has done for Trump, you would be apoplectic with rage. But no, it's all right because he's your guy.
We feel...
Well, they are increasing defence spending big time.
Yeah, I mean, if we got on somebody from Poland or Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania, they would say letting Putin control Ukraine is not the end of it. It's just the beginning.
Well, the other point that he is likely to make in relation to any deal that he tries to do between Russia and Ukraine is for it to be accepted that Ukraine will never become a member of NATO. I mean, all these pro-Putin people around, foreign policy people around Trump have been pretty clear about that. So if he gets that sort of sense of neutrality imposed on Ukraine, that, as you say, that's going to send a pretty shocking signal right around the place.
And will also mean that the other things that Putin wants logically follow. So Putin also wants to make sure that Georgia and Moldova don't become part of the European Union. I mean, they're theoretically on their path to joining, and he will say, no, these are former Soviet states.
Yeah.
They're within my sphere of influence. They can't have anything to do with them. So let's just sort of to continue to develop.
So that is all very worrying, and a very good analysis of the whole program there, audio issues aside. I'm deeply scared about the direction of travel of certain parts of Europe. Well, in fact, all over Europe. We've got the far right being fermented by Russia, and in some places the far left as well. You've got sensible centrism taking a hit, and you're losing voters either way. And yet it's those kind of centre-left, centre and centre-right parties that are behind Ukraine prevailing for very obvious geopolitical and moral reasons. And yet there's a chipping away of EU unity, which people think, when you get ultra-nationalists, you think, it's all about us not understanding the whole geopolitical makeup of the world. And if the EU falls apart, how do you compete against 1 billion people in China and 1 billion people in India and a Russia that's been emboldened to invade countries, and the US sitting back and go, oh no, we're not interested in security and stability in Europe anymore. We are, and then also, by the way, tearing up environmental climate change accords and agreements. Trump will be deregulating the environment. I mean, mark my words, that it's the torching so much of what is good and right and proper, in my opinion, in the US. Like reproductive rights, environmental, the rights of the environment, if you like, just gone. Europe don't care. We're going to go into little Americana, and we're going to drill as much oil as we possibly can, just spray it everywhere, burn it all up, and then have Christian nationalism, and then there you go, thank you very much. Diversity can go out the window. Don't really care about human beings at all, really, just deeply transactional. As long as I'm all right, they've already put in place getting rid of coming out and giving a speech, he's going to get rid of the Department of Education. Get rid of the Department of Education, send it to the states. So no national standards, just all the states, and we know how well that's gone for reproductive rights, right? So on and so forth. It's just it's being torched, honestly. And you might think that's great. I just massively disagree with you, and it's not looking good for the whole world, really. I'm not in a good place now in terms of what I think about the rest of the world or the future of the world. Now the EU is trying to fight back on this. So Joseph Borrell's been in Ukraine. He said Ukraine has achieved a very good result in the latest EU enlargement report, even outperforming some countries that have been preparing for membership for years. Really good indications that Ukraine, even at war, is doing a really good job of jumping through the hoops in order to accede to the EU eventually. He said, I cannot predict the intentions of the US administration that does not yet exist, but I know the European Council has just confirmed the commitment of the European Union to support Ukraine, and I came to Kyiv to convey this signal to you. The 10-year security agreement which the EU signed with Ukraine in June remains in force. We supported and will continue to support Ukraine, and we will do it not because we are very friendly and very generous, but because it's in our interest. Security of Ukraine is part of our security. That's entirely my point about what the US should be doing. It's not about being friendly and generous, although that's nice if you're friendly and generous, right? But in terms of what international nations or intranational organizations do, we do things from a national point of view that align with in order to achieve our strategic objectives. Helping Ukraine is in our strategic objectives, its strategic interests, as it is for the US. But the US problem is Trump, for example, and many of his supporters just go back to this individualistic, as if like the nation is you and you are the nation, and you're just an individual with a credit card and you're going around spending on stuff. And it's like, well, why am I spending stuff over there? I want to buy stuff over here. Just, I'm just going to sit over here and just buy my own stuff here. But it's just problematic because the nation isn't an individual person, and it's too simplistic to think that we're just operating with a credit card and we need to keep our credit card bill down, and that you get return on investment for working for exporting security around the world, and you get return on investment for investing in the stability and security of other parts of the world that are allied to you culturally and in terms of economy and military objectives. British Finance Minister Darren Jones has said Ukraine should be restored to pre-war borders, including Crimea. Jones has stated that the UK's position remains unchanged despite Trump's return to the White House, which is interesting because what have we heard from the incoming administration about, say, Crimea? So, as the UK's position remains unchanged despite Trump's return to the White House, here we have a Kyiv independent. Crimea is gone. Senior Trump advisor says Ukraine needs to have realistic war aims. So basically, the new US administration, although I think they've had to come out and do a bit of message adjustment there, and they've said, oh no, we don't think that. But a senior advisor to President-elect Donald Trump has said that Ukraine needs to be realistic in its aims for the war, adding that Russian-occupied peninsula Crimea was gone. Speaking to the BBC on November the 9th, Republicans party strategist Brian Lanza said the Trump administration would ask Zelensky to present a realistic vision for peace. What really pisses me off about this is that Trump says, oh, art the deal, I know how to make a deal. And by doing this, you're saying already, so this is like the anchor bias. Whenever you go and go and look into the anchor bias, but whenever you go and do a deal, you put out the most unrealistic position that you think that could possibly be achieved. And then the other person does the other way, and you meet somewhere in the middle, right? So you say, I'm selling you this house. I want to sell it for £500,000. And the other person's like, what? That's worth £350,000. Okay, all other things remaining equal. They're just two of you and blah, blah, blah. And then you go towards the middle. But you anchor with £500,000. So the other person is understanding that as an anchor point. I remember going and doing, it sounds a bit harsh, right? But in Gambia, when I was on holiday there years ago, and at a market stall, and they would use the anchor bias really, really well. And they'd say, I forget what it was, but it'd be like, yeah, I want to sell you this bracelet for 200 spondulis. And what that means is that, 200 spondulis, if I go half of that, 100 spondulis, I'm getting a really good price. They've anchored you with 200. So that half of that seems really good. But actually, that anchoring is completely false. And this thing's only worth, like, at most 20 spondulis. Literally 20 spondulis, and they've gone in at 200. So you go, oh no, how about 100? They go, 180, and you go, 120, and you end up paying 150. And they've just done you, because as soon as they've done 200, and you accept that that's a reputable anchor point, you have been had, right? So I used to go in, they'd say 200, and I would say, I'll give you 10. Literally, I'd say, I'll give you 10. And they go, you go, no, 10. No, 10. No, 10. And then I'll walk away. And if they didn't call me back, who cares? It's a bracelet. Or if they do, you're like, yeah, now we're speaking the same language. So, but people don't like that. So, but anchor bias, that's what's going on. Right, okay. So now let's put that here into international deal making. If you are going into the agreement and saying, well, Crimea is not realistic, so that's off the table, you are already saying you're anchoring it, so you should be anchoring it right down here, but you're already up there. You've given them that. You've gone in and said, you should be saying, no, we want Crimea. We want everything back. That's your starting point. You don't go in and say, oh, you lost Crimea. Realistically, you're not going to have Crimea. You might think that, but you don't start negotiations with that. As absolutely freaking irresponsible. Irresponsible. But Trump's done this. He said back about 6 months ago in the Face the Nation interview, I think it was, where he said, oh, yeah, no, they're going to have to concede territory. They're going to have to cede territory. You're like, you don't say that. You say you're this great deal maker. That's rubbish deal making, unless you understand that Actually, he wants Russia to come out with the most that Russia can possibly get, in which case you're morally compromised. So you're either a useful tool for Russia or you're absolutely rubbish at doing deals. Anyway, rant over, but it really annoys me that, as you can see. So when Zelensky says we will stop this fighting, there will be peace once Crimea is returned. We've got news for President Zelensky. Crimea is gone, he said. Well, there you go. Lanza did not reference the Donbass during the interview, but said the return of Crimea was not the goal of the United States. And do you think this administration is going to be good for Ukraine? I've got news for you. You've been hoodwinked. Despite US troops never being deployed in Ukraine, nor Kyiv ever requesting as much, Lanza added Ukraine would be on your own if the goal was having American soldiers fight to get Crimea back. No one's asked for that. In fact, explicitly, Zelensky said, we don't want your troops. Brian Lanza was a constructor for the campaign, the unnamed spokesperson told Reuters. He does not work for President Trump and does not speak for him. So this has been... following reports of his comments, the spokesperson for Trump's White House distanced Lanza from Trump. So they're like, oh, that's a bit embarrassing. But that's basically what they believe. Lanza's just said it out loud. Yeah, absolutely not happy with that. Keir Starmer and Macron plan urgent discussions in Paris about convincing the Biden administration to authorize Ukrainian long-range strikes into Russian territory using Storm Shadow missiles before Trump takes office. If they give that permission, then that'd be good. But this, again, if this is true, this is a Telegraph article. If that's true, which it appears that no reason to disbelieve it, then it is the Americans that are stopping those missiles being sent. So that annoyed me, you know, when you read in The Guardian that Zelensky's annoyed with Starmer about missile use. It's like, well, yeah, it's not on him. Actually, he wants more missiles, and I just think that's possibly too difficult to achieve. Anyway, I talked about that before. Le Monde writes that while Western countries have remained tight-lipped about the deployment of North Korean soldiers, their intelligence services continue to work behind the scenes with the Ukrainian armed forces. On 4th and 5th of November, according to a French diplomatic source, the head of the French Foreign Intelligence Service, DGSI, Nicolas Lerner, travelled to Kyiv to meet his counterparts. According to our information, the visit was part of enhanced cooperation exchanges focused on Russian troops and their North Korean auxiliaries. So yeah, there are discussions ongoing. The Ukrainian embassy in Canada has launched a project to expose Russian propaganda impacting Canadian society. Goodness me, that they could do with expanding that through into the US. The initiative began with Toronto's screening of Zinema, a documentary exploring Russian media manipulation since the 1990s. Good stuff in Canada there. EU is preparing the 15th sanctions package against Russia, targeting foreign-made parties, readying its 15th package of sanctions. Those are components that are to be used in Russian weaponry that the EU is looking at curtailing the sale of. Borrell's comments come, so this is Joseph Borrell again, as Zelensky continues to urge Western allies to apply more sanctions across the providers of components used predominantly in Russian attack drones. Seems like the pressure is just building. 15 sanctions packages, that's serious commitment, says someone. Yeah, you just have to keep these up though. Like they go on and on as loopholes are found, and then you find there are other areas that they're succeeding in, and it's just a constant pressure that needs to be applied to the gaping wound that is Russia. Breaking, German Vice-Chancellor Robert Habeck has said the regulation of algorithms of X and TikTok through the application of European legal norms is a central task. We cannot place democratic discourse in the hands of Elon Musk or Chinese software. So in other words, they really want to regulate Twitter for disinformation in Europe. So the reason I mention that is not just about disinformation and about how Twitter is an absolute black hole of facticity, but actually it's because now that Musk is the most powerful man in the world, more powerful than Trump, he's got the money and he's got the position of power. He's grey tongue. like whispering, worm tongue in Lord of the Rings, isn't it? Whispering sweet nothings into, or evil horrors into Trump's ears, and bending Trump to his will. Now, there are some people that say, actually, this is not a relationship that's going to last. Trump will not like Musk too much. Like he doesn't like people who he sees as threats, and so Trump might end up getting rid of who is it? It's Anti-Scaramucci said he's going to put him in the wood chipper pretty soon, is what he thinks. I don't know. We'll see. But here is an example. So of the compromise that's taking place by having these kind of oligarchs messing around with the White House. So Trump regime's JD Vance has threatened to withdraw US support for NATO if the EU tried to regulate Elon Musk. That is corruption. That is compromise. That's got nothing to do with the American government. The regulation of Twitter in line with their the EU's policies. This is trying to appease Elon Musk as an individual. That is a conflict of interests. Imagine this was happening with the Democrats. The Republicans would be going insane. Absolutely insane. So JD Vance is saying, if you try and regulate my mate Elon Musk, we're going to pull out of NATO, essentially threatening retaliation against Europe if they tried to combat Russian and fascist disinformation. Offboard X and follow us on Blue Sky, says Anonymous. Well, I'm working really hard. As you can see, there's a number of Blue Sky icons up there, and there could be more. People are going by the million over to Blue Sky, and I am one that is trying to do that. JD Vance says the US could drop support for NATO if Europe tries to regulate Elon Musk's platforms, says this newspaper article. Yeah, it's a real worry. It appears that I haven't heard too much more about this, but protests are still going on in Tbilisi, filled with protesters here. This was yesterday. The old Tbilisi filled with protesters has a very particular effect on me and my fighting spirit, says Marika Mikiashvili. The song is I Am Georgia, the national football anthem that turned into the spring protest anthem. I consider it a masterpiece for many reasons. So there they are, sort of singing away. Anyway, whatnot, and whatnot, no, it's very dismissive. There is a need, I think, for Georgia to prevail here, but it's going to be very difficult, and I think those protests need to be consistent and permanent, rather like the Euromaidan protests, as I think it was Matt Bishop that was saying on a live stream with him recently, and I think he's absolutely right. I think if you have a protest, go home, come back, so what? You need to bring you need to have a permanent protest in situ to bring the capital to a halt. It's a small country, not a very big population. It needs to get hardcore, is my opinion. Ivana Stradner, who's a Baltics expert, says, and Pekka Kaljuniemi says everyone should come to the other place, the one with Blue Sky. And Ivana Stradner says, and also join Threads. I'm building a new network there. It's so much better than here. So just to let you know, I'm trying to do that myself. Now, I was going to go through a Vacnick soup on the Heritage Foundation because they are behind the Trump administration big time, and that should give you an understanding of what the blueprint is for the Trump administration going forward, and then how that might affect Ukraine as well. I'm going to leave that to tomorrow. I think it's a useful one to discuss with you. But I've been speaking long enough today on all my videos. So take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.